So what do clan rats, zombies, gobbos, nobbos and peasant mob all have in common? If you said, well Zerg, they're all absolutely shit, well then that's 10 points to you, my friend. These type of units are of course all expendable, meaning they only really have one job.
Death.
Which doesn't mean they're completely useless, there's a lot of good useful ways to die. Jesus Christ, don't leave your kids alone with this guy, by the way. Creepers aside, let's talk about some of the useful ways we can actually employ these wastes of space. Firstly, though, we must understand the overarching ethos of these kind of expendable units, and that is ultimately to die for the greater good. Their job as crappy units is to protect the stronger units of the army, the things that might actually win the battle for you. The crappy unit sacrifice can facilitate the better performance of these stronger units. So, how can we make the best use of all these absolute shitters? Well, 3 main ways to start with. The first one is to have them eat charges. You can put them out in front of your main front line and have them just soak up all the charges from any dangerous units with big charge bonuses that might do a good bit of extra damage to your main front line upon impact. This then allows those units to get into combat nice and fresh without the damage from that charge to the face. They may not necessarily still win their frontline fight, but they'll perform better than they otherwise would have. And the same idea if you put the expendable units out on the flanks, they can absorb cav charges, protecting those actual anti-large units that do of course have charge negation themselves, but they'll at least not take the damage from the charge impact and such, so it can be useful, but it really depends on the situation. You probably don't need to block the charge of peasant horsemen, for example, but you might want to do this for blood knights. And here's a great example of this, the goblins taking the Centaur charge on the nose, taking one for the team, taking a lot of damage here, but they're setting up the nasty skulkers to come in and help out and smoke bomb them so they can't get away, and also the Boarcav to come in and take them out, so those 2 stronger units are able to do the damage, take out the cavalry, while the goblins took the brunt of the damage. Teamwork makes the dream work and all that, as long as somebody dies for the greater good. Okay! This is actually incredibly important as well for units with no clothes on or no armor, 0 armor units like Slayers, Witch Elves. These units really need protecting because as you can see here, taking a big charge, they are going to lose half of their health within like 5 seconds of engaging, so they are going to be far less useful than they would be if they didn't have to eat that charge. So if you can get someone else to eat that charge, whether it be miners in the case of dwarfs or a lord or hero, anything that can just stop them charging and hitting your slayers big time, that's going to protect them and allow those slayers to get much more work done because they won't lose all their health in 5 seconds. So yes, having your expendable units eat up the charges, whether it's on the front line or at the flanks, can be incredibly useful. But as I say, depends on the situation, observe the battlefield, observe the units, see where it's going to be a good idea. If the enemy has a crappy front line and strong flanking units, obviously block the flanking units, and vice versa. Next, another big usage of these kind of units, they are there to draw missiles. They want to be shot in the face, so put them out the front of the army and let them just take them on the chin. Especially good though if they have shields, because they can block some of those missiles, they'll survive longer and make the enemy waste more of their ammo, rather in those than in our more expensive, more useful plague monks or rat ogres or whatever. It can also draw out the enemy's spells, making them use them before the expensive units get to them. As you see here, I pull my plague monks back just in time, so it potentially wastes ammo, which is especially useful if it's strong armor piercing ammo, and can draw it away from being fired into your more expensive, more important units. Although the AI on higher difficulties is a bit smarter and will target those better units rather than just shooting at whatever's closest in front of it, as it will do at first. And honestly, if the enemy is playing super defensive and is just determined to blast whatever's in front of it, regardless, you could just sit your expendable units there, letting them eat up all of their ammo, or as much as possible, before sending the rest of your army in. And if that ammo happens to be from Way Watchers or Sisters of Avalon or Jezzails or anything else with really strong expensive missiles, that is a massive waste for them, and that is good for you. And the same idea with artillery. If you can get them to waste their artillery ammo on these crappy expendable units, then that is a good use of the expendable unit's life. Again, dying for the greater good. The third main useful way to use these expendable units is to disrupt the enemy backline. They offer you a carefree way to get after those missile units and artillery in the back, because you can just send them in, they're expendable. If they die and get munched down by cavalry or monstrous infantry, it doesn't really matter, but at least they tried. But in a lot of cases, you can get after those missiles, make them move, get them out of position so that they stop firing. If they're not firing, they're not dangerous. You can try and beat them up. Maybe you won't be able to beat them and actually get rid of them, but you can buy time for another unit, a stronger unit, to get over there and do that instead. So it's definitely valuable. Even if your expendable unit maybe did something else and took a charge to the face and lost half its life and ran away, maybe it's come back now, it can still do the job of chasing down missiles and artillery. So send your expendable units after missiles and artillery, but do set up the follow-up attack to actually get rid of those missiles and artillery. Maybe you've got a free cavalry or monstrous infantry or lord or hero that can go and do the job, because as I say, these cheap crappy units might not be strong enough to actually get rid of the unit they're attacking, so they'll need some help to do that. So those are the three primary ways to use expendable units. Here's a few quick secondary kind of ways that you can use them. First of all, as a sponge. For damage, of course, either before or after your front line has engaged, you can put your expendable units in alongside those frontline units, and while they won't do a ton of damage, they will take a lot of damage, and that takes it off of the more important actual frontline unit, helping their survivability, so ultimately making your front line last longer. These crappy units can also be used to extend your front line if you should need it. If the enemy has overwhelming numbers and they're going to flank round behind you, these crappy units can at least get in the way for a short time. Even though they might not be able to stop what's coming around there, they can hold them off, and that gives you time to find something else to take care of these flankers with. And that brings us into another point, that these kind of units can be great for just buying time. Even if it's only like 10, 20, 30 seconds, that's enough time to move a cavalry or monstrous infantry over there to help out a lord or hero, a magic spell to come off cooldown, the room to get your missile units back. If a unit like this does flank around and is going to threaten those missiles, you can get them away with the time bought by this expendable unit. And these little expendable pathetic bastards can also be useful to help your lord stay alive, especially if they're threatened by a stronger lord, like in this case old Heinrich Kemmler got Luen on his back. He needs to escape, and perhaps this is one more for summonable units, so it's more for those kind of lords and heroes. But if you've got a crappy unit that you can pull your lord through and drag the enemy lord through and that they'll get stuck on, buying you the space to get away with your lord and potentially save his damn life. They can also be useful for the good old chase-off. When a strong unit is routed, chase it down with your expendable unit so that it doesn't come back, because they can keep doing damage to it even if it's a strong unit like Chosen here, and if your expendable unit gets wildly out of position, it's not a huge deal. And lastly, these kind of units can be very useful to exhaust the enemy, so that by the time they come to fight some of your important units, they are tired, very tired, maybe even exhausted. So for example, these witch elves have just beaten up some clan rats, and now they move on to the plague monks, but they go into that fight tired already, not to mention a little bit beaten up from the clan rats, so the witch elves are a little bit less dangerous than they would be if they were fresh. So it's only a small advantage for the plague monks, but an advantage nonetheless. So there's all those different ways you can make use of expendable units, and it doesn't end with infantry. There are plenty of cheap cavalries like goblin wolf riders, peasant horsemen, mounted yeomen. These can all be used in the exact same way to do the same job, as you see here, absorbing a blood knight charge so that the broken tusk mob who are actually going to take them on don't have to take that charge and all that damage, which they will suffer greatly from, so this will allow them to perform much better. So expendable units, as utterly shite as they might seem, can actually be pretty damn useful when you sacrifice them for the greater good. And well, this is just talking about battles. If you go into campaign, you can actually buff these crappy units up to be not so scheisse after all. Take this lovely army of gobos, for example, all costing a mere 1600, and they are juiced up to the max. Look at those stats: 72 armor, 44 melee attack, 36 melee defense, not great weapon strength still, but a 15% physical resistance and vanguard deployment, pretty nice. This is of course all coming from the Lord's skill points and items and technologies that can buff them up. So with the right Lord in the right hands, they can become actually a pretty formidable little army. Even if it's just spamming all the same unit and it's just this crappy little expendable unit, you can turn them into something pretty nasty. For the price anyway. And then the next thing you know, your little army of gobos will be beating up an army of dwarfs. Always nice. But there we go. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Thanks to all the patrons who support this channel. And hey, you want more tactics? I got a playlist right here. I'll see you in the future.